This is what 1516 is all about, bringing people together to share one of the stars of Nebraska. And tonight I'm proud to introduce Matt Mason, the new state poet. Now, like every artist, they survive because we support them. And I want to point out, because I know how tough it is to ask people to buy your own work. I was in that business for years. Hardest thing there is to do. Easier to get a shill, that's me, to encourage you to take a look at the books here on the stand. And this is Matt.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming out on a snowy evening. I genuinely thought it would be like me and two other people, both of whom would be related to me. So this is a real thrill. This is the Dundee Book Company. It's got their bookshelves. Buy my books. I'll be signing later. Sarah's got one book left over there. She's selling better than me, as well she should. Well, she should. But no, there's other Nebraska writers there. There's this Todd Robinson guy who I don't suggest you support, but what can you do? He would be signing that later also. But before I go on too much, I want to thank Gallery 1516 for really putting this whole thing together, which is a weird thing for me. I'm an event organizer, so I'm used to hauling out chairs myself and going to Hy-Vee for the cake. But Gallery 1516 is, yes?
There is one piece of cake left.
All right. But I promised there would be cake, and there is, and there are brownies and other things. But that's all here from the gallery and the friends of Gallery 1516. So let's hear it for all of them. Before I get too far, though, I'll read in a little bit. There will be a question and answer, and there will be more cake eating. But we've got, at my remarks on Monday, there was an event at the state capitol, and I mentioned one of the biggest thing that has kind of driven me as far as I have with poetry isn't my own whatever, but it's the support I've received from community members here in Omaha ever since I moved back here in 1995. I grew up here, but it's really the supportive community and the fantastic folks here. So we're going to hear some poems from some people who've been fantastic to me. First, we'll hear a poem from Greg Kosmicki, and then J.V. Brummels, then Zedeka Poindexter, and then someone named Sophia Mason. But first off, Greg Kosmicki he was the founder and editor of the Backwaters Press for a good long time, and they'd since, the press has won more Nebraska Book Awards than anyone. I don't know if that's true, but I think it is. At least in poetry, pretty much every other year it was the Backwaters Press title winning, and he's done great work for local poets, for national poets. But when I moved back here, I was just some kid with a master's degree, coming to poetry readings, and Greg took notice and invited me to be a reader at a series he ran at the diner. And he was the first person to just kind of see some young kid and want to bring me in and see what I could do. And he's been a supporter of my work ever since. So I'm so grateful. Please welcome up Greg.
Thank you. Yeah, Matt has been so instrumental in the poetry scene in Omaha that I don't think 90% of us would be here or have ever heard of poetry if it wasn't for Matt. So, and he back in 2009 got together and did a project over at the new Film Streams building. They had an empty room, and so he got a project together called Filling the Empty Room, and had, I don't know, he must have contacted every poet in the 20-state region, because he 5 or 6 poets every night read for an entire month. So that was quite a thing, and I was invited to read to that. Backwaters Press poets were invited to read. And this is a poem that I wrote for that. He also collected together a book called Filling the Empty Room. And this poem's not in there, but it's here, so. Lines written to present to a living audience. I stand here before you to read this poem off a sheet of 50-pound recycled paper, printed with words I wrote several months ago on a night in September 2009. It was a Saturday night. I had worked on proofing some of my own poems on the computer and had answered some emails. My wife and I watched TV that afternoon to see the Nebraska Cornhuskers ridiculously lose a game of football they were playing, winning to the Virginia Tech Hokies. Also that day in Omaha, Nebraska, there were 2 murders an hour apart from each other. But in Omaha, the news of the game and of even the weather took precedence over 2 human beings getting killed. Anyway, here I am reading this poem to you, and there you are listening to me, as if I were a person who knows something of life, who has a secret to understanding that you don't have, or that you know you do have, but sometimes feel or think that you don't know how to express. I know that sometimes you just want to scream at the person standing in front of you, reading words that he or she has written some months ago and then typed up. Shut up, you're making me crazy with all your BS, your assumed errors, your silly stories about your stupid life. If that's what you're thinking, as I'm sure some of you are, allow me to extend to you my apologies, or maybe even my hand, as if we were all of us in this room shipwrecked, lost on a dark sea in the middle of our lives. All the old certainties now no longer worth anything. Let me give my hand to you to pull you up, to pull you onto the shore of my certainty, my belief that these words here on this page are real. Though I wrote them months and months ago, possibly even years, and that I know nothing more than you do about survival at sea, or in anything at all for that matter, not life in general or in board meetings in particular, nor in making love, nor cooking up an egg the right way, nor in raising up children. All I know how to do is to keep writing these words down on the page that stay behind me like tracks I have left coming out of the jungle, though I have never been in the jungle, coming out of the desert, though I have only been in the desert to gamble or urinate beside an ancient Joshua tree. Though I know no more about mountains than what I have learned about them from a few hours of staying in them, a few brief walks, and for all the rest of what little I know of the world comes from images in books and words in books, just like the desert or the ocean or even the Great Plains where I grew up, nor love or hate or Nepal or situational ethics. It's all been only a little bit of actual pressing my face against a rock, or my fingers in the cracks between the bricks and mortar of a building, or on the flesh of another person's thigh. I know I've literally seen spiders leaving their webs, and I've seen a dog take a crap on a lawn more than once, and I've seen 2 squirrels going at it in my driveway, and even a few animals other places. And I've looked up at the night sky to see more stars than I could comprehend, knowing that our culture's number system in relation to the universe is like the tribesmen's they found in ancient villages whose number systems were 1 and everything greater than 1. But maybe those Stone Age guys are onto it. Maybe they know what I do not, and you may not. You see, I can't even know that about you. We only learn through our bodies. And if I reach out my hand here tonight to you where you float on that little piece of flotsam or jetsam you call your life, you can actually touch it. My brothers, my sisters, my fathers, my mothers, who are all out there at the tangled ends of these lines that looked like barbed wire the night I wrote them in my crabbed hand, that look like the lines of communication we must keep open, that look like the earth opening up and drawing us back in, that go out from me and into you, into the unbridgeable, bridgeable space between us, the synapse of the poem. Thank you.
So I mentioned J.V. Brummels also. When I moved back here, J.V. Brummels was a teacher up at Wayne State College, just a couple hours away. And, I would go to the Nebraska Book Festival. I met various people. And J.V. is one who had me come out and talk to a class. And then some of the TAs there brought me out to talk to their classes. And then more people kept, I love Wayne State College just because they kept having me out and making me feel like I knew what I was doing. And eventually the Nebraska Book Festival was at Wayne State College, and JV brought me out and had a blast. I was still at that point, kind of new in the community, young in the poetry world. And, I had this really crappy chapbook of poems that I'd printed out someplace and brought with me. And it's like, can you put this on the table? And they're like, yeah, sure. And then the guy running the table is a guy named Jim Reese, who's now possibly the next South Dakota State Poet. We're waiting to hear. I don't think they've announced anything yet. He's a finalist at least. And so that night at the bar, there's a poetry slam. The bar is packed with like 100 people in this small space. And Jim Reese kept looking, that guy sold so many chapbooks. Like, he didn't know who I was, but he kept just pointing me out. And it's like, Wayne State College has been very good to me. And also JV. He's been supporting young writers, especially around the region, bringing them up to Wayne, encouraging them, supporting them. The students there, so many of them have gone on to do things like be finalists for the State Poet of South Dakota, as well as a lot of other fantastic work. So let's hear from JV.
I'm just honored to be here. Yeah, we had Matt up a lot. And the reason we did that was because he's a wonderful human being and a wonderful poet. And it was all self-serving. That was the deal. I was listening to Greg, and I thought that was a wonderful poem. I can't look through those. I have to look over these. And I thought, and that poem's appropriate for this occasion. And then I thought, I don't have a poem that's appropriate for such an august occasion. And then I thought, I don't have a poem that's appropriate for anything. But this is a newer one, and just showed up in a journal I like, San Pedro River Review. It's pretty brief. Stations of the Cross. Tonight, I'm a cartoon drunk in an alley on my way home from a bar, circling my dropped hat for the correct geometry, each hiccup a puff of breeze fluffing my winter hair. Walking women on the street, caught in the corner of my eye, call a spade a spade. That man, a guilty boy. I'm in no shape to argue. My sins run stride for stride with outlaws and outsiders across years and pages and imagined skies. Each hand of cards tells two tales. Better to die a part of, if alone, and winter is an ornery fact. Soon I'll be flat on my back as a prairie skyline, my mind an open plain. Just one more in a row of cowboys leaning on a bar in a Bassett saloon, heading to a dance next month in a town called Rose. Boys, I'll say, take it from a big-bellied silverback. And remember, he said, she said, baby, I'd go with you to Mullen, but all our shit's in Valentine.
Yeah, like I said, I'm so glad that JV and Greg could be here tonight, just because they've done the work that I've tried to emulate over the years of supporting other writers. That's what they've been great at, and I can't imagine I'd be here without him. So thank you. We've also got, like I said, a few other poets going to start things off. Up next, Zedeka Poindexter is a fantastic writer locally who's been part of the Poetry Slam community and a huge help whenever, as I've gone on to run the Poetry Slam and run the Nebraska Writers Collective, when I've needed help, Zedeka has been there. At a time when the Writers Collective kept me so busy that I couldn't run the Poetry Slam I was running every month, the first person I wanted to run it is Zedeka, and she took it over and kept it alive for a little bit. And then her own life started going into things like small children and all. But if there are any literary journal magazines or people connected with literary journals, Zedeka is a poet who's not been published nearly enough, and I suggest you listen to her words and contact her afterwards because she is an absolutely stunning writer. Zedeka.
So Matt's been supporting people, and the best way I know how to say that is in 2000 or so, he had a poetry reading at Borders and walked up to me after I read a poem that scared the crap out of me and said, "You are so talented." He saw me again 5 years later and invited me to be a part of an Omaha team in a completely separate state right before him and Sarah got married. Like, he supports the community, but he's also supported me in more ways than I can count. So I'm blessed to be here to celebrate this event. All right, I got two really short things, so I'm gonna go. I spend my time speaking on empty pots, ways to fill them that remind me of Sunday dinners, the kind of nostalgic poverty that everybody I know knows, or the kitchen in the house no one could afford to keep when Gran died. I know those pots well now, how much they can hold and the heat they can handle, the weight they put on my not so good wrist, how to care for them. Rub them with oil, never use soap, don't soak them. Who would wash away decades of seasoning because it's easier than the work it takes to preserve the shiny gloss of heat and oil and time? Some say seasoning cast iron is just about what sticks, but I swear I can taste history's presence, or maybe the memory of what was cooked last week, year, or generation that sets my expectation of what's to come. Man, okay. I can cook a mean pot of greens. I don't eat them, really don't enjoy them, but for this, people tell me I have lost my raising. As if the best mix of turnip, collard, and mustard is not as familiar as my childhood home. How to carefully soak and clean the leaves, remove the ribs, chop the remainder, use scrap meat and bone broth to make the mouth believe it's fuller than what it is. Pinch in salt and pepper as the whole thing stews. Maybe I forgot, my tongue is strange, unaccented, accepts mayonnaise but not salt pork, but maybe I'm too picky, but baby, there's nothing wrong with my memory. Who could forget something so specific as blues guitar and scraps in a too small kitchen, the distant scent of packing houses where my grandfather worked, and watching mystified as 2 full sinks full of leaves cooked down into a single pot.
Thank you, Zedeka. Thank you so much for being here. We have one more reader before me. This is a person who's known as my daughter. It's a surprise to have her here tonight because she is a visual artist. She spends a good hour every night and then some drawing in sketch pads and creating just absolutely beautiful work. But just this year, she started writing. She joined the Nebraska, or the Louder Than a Bomb team at Omaha Central. Come on in, come on in. And so she's been writing poems, and she is here to read one for you. So let's hear it for Sophia.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I'm Sophia Mason, State Poet's daughter. And he's a pretty amazing poet, but I'd also like to say that he is also an amazing dad, so. So this is called House of Poetry. I live in a house of poetry, surrounded by the trees, for they inspire, with books around every corner full of all the words of the world seamlessly strung together, and papers with documents and half-formed ideas wander about the rooms as the dog lies in comfort, sighing softly, where I would stare into the eyes of the golden monkey sitting in the laundry room, and be up in Dad's arms in dimly lit rooms, too young to understand the language of poetry, so I'd focus on the mysterious painted face behind me. Mom and Dad working on books, the sound of pens scribbling with paper, or the quick clicks of keys grown to be home in my ears. Birds sing in spring as the sun begins to melt into the land again. Winters are cold, dark, and harsh, prompting us to pour our angst on the page. Deer come to our house to greet us like we live in a Disney cartoon. Dogs bark and leaves rustle and we write. I live alongside art in a world that inspires me to make art. I live in a house of poetry. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sarah McKinstry-Brown, also known as Sarah Mason, Matt Mason's wife. That was my kid, and I'm like, how am I going to hold it together? I have to introduce him. And it's so beautiful. You know, Zedeka was in the waiting room while I was in labor with Sophia all night, and then she finally left because it was all night. And then some. But this is just a really beautiful full circle moment for us. So I have an introduction. I asked Matt if I could introduce him. And it's a little bit lengthy, but it's a little bit of a snapshot, a little bit of a history lesson in sort of the life of Matt as a poet. And then you'll get to hear him finally. So in order to understand what brings us all here tonight to celebrate my husband, your new state poet, you have to first understand why, early on in our courtship, I questioned whether or not it was a good idea to actually marry this man. Matt and I got engaged soon after we'd met, which was how, in the year leading up to our wedding, I suddenly found myself cohabitating with someone whose phone, back when landlines were a thing, was constantly ringing. And it wasn't just that people were always calling Matt, it was that 99.9% of the time, the person on the other end of the line was someone who Matt barely knew or didn't know at all, calling with some kind of poetry-related request. Once it was a woman in her late 80s who'd read a snippet about Matt in the paper, looked up his number in the phone book, back when phone books were a thing, and called to say, "I've always loved writing poetry and I saw your name in the paper. Can you help me?" Of course he could. Of course he did. Another time it was the newly divorced middle-aged man who found comfort and community in coming to the slam Matt was running, working through his grief by performing poems punctuated by the percussive slapping of rhythms he created using his exposed beer belly as his beloved instrument. This man called to find out if Matt would help him publish his first chapbook, tentatively titled Beer Belly Bongo. I remember thinking, say no. I'm sure I was even mouthing quite clearly, say no, while waving my hands wildly in front of Matt. But Matt, of course, being Matt, replied with an enthusiastic yes. I kept waiting for him to get tired of these requests. They rolled in with such incredible frequency. Soon, I'd selfishly think, as his almost wife and then as his wife and partner in raising 2 small children, he'll get tired. He'll say no. He'll say, I don't have time, or what can you do for me, or beer belly percussion isn't really in line with my aesthetic. But I learned early on that Matt is a man who only knows how to say yes to his community, which he deeply loves, to say yes to poetry, which he deeply loves. Over the course of months, then years, now decades, I saw and continue to see firsthand how much community, all of you, and poetry, which is all of you too, meant to him. And it became undeniable that as long as he and I were sharing a life, I would have to share him with the world. First, it was the summer honors program he taught annually in Holdridge, where he'd return with stories of high school students who'd fallen in love with poetry, and by default him, with one particular group of students deciding to write, perform, and record an original song for Matt, the chorus going something like, Matt Mason, please be our king. I still remember it. I think we still have the CD. Then it was almost every school across Nebraska, even in the tiniest of towns, where for close to 7 years, as he read and performed poems like The Baby That Ate Cincinnati, or Make Star Love, Not Star Wars, as a way to get kids excited about Poetry Out Loud, a national recitation project created by the National Endowment for the Arts and the Poetry Foundation that's dedicated to igniting young people's connection to poetry. And while he continued to travel Nebraska as he wrote his first and then second book, he was also running the Poetry Slam at the Ohm Center and beginning what would be some of his most important work in running the Louder Than a Bomb Youth Poetry Festival here in Omaha. When Paul and Annette Smith, two of Omaha's most dedicated supporters of the arts, saw the Louder Than a Bomb documentary at Film Streams and decided they wanted to find a way to bring the festival to Omaha, they flew out to Chicago to meet the filmmakers. And what I love most about what happened next is that it shows how far-reaching Matt's influence was and is. As the folks in Chicago basically said, if you want to bring this type of programming and festival to Omaha, we're not the people you should be talking to. You need to fly back and go talk to Matt Mason. In the midst of all this, Matt began to go global in his work as a cultural envoy for the State Department. Did you know that your Nebraska-raised boy brought the first ever poetry slam to the communist country of Belarus? Yeah. Or that 1 year later, Matt, along with two other performance poets, ran a poetry slam workshop in Nepal, where he inspired a local young woman to launch an organization called Word Warriors, with the goal of getting the people of Nepal engaged with their government and creating change through creative writing. Did you know he did the same work in Botswana in 2014? And in Romania in 2015, where he ran poetry writing workshops and slams with the high school students. Over the course of his 2-week-long visits to Romania, everyone fell in love with him so quickly that the teachers kept asking if he'd like a job at the school where he'd been visiting. I tried to convince him to go, and he was like, they don't have enough coal to get through their winter, so I'm not moving my family to Romania where they don't have enough coal to get through the winter. But you probably didn't know these things. Matt's not yet perfected the humble brag or even the brag. All these years later, he's still responding to your email about your chapbook, or your full-length collection, or your idea for your next book, or your brand new reading series, and it's clear. Matt has never just belonged to me or his daughters, he's always belonged to all of you too. Whoever you are, Matt will almost always answer your call, and mine, and our daughters. And because of that, I think of him when I return to one of my favorite quotes, from the Poet HD, which reads, I go where I love and where I am loved. Into the snow, I go to the things I love with no thought of duty or pity. Steady, gracious, humble, funny, kind, generous. These are the words I'd use to describe my husband's poetry, but they're also the words I'd use to describe him. So I'm pleased now to introduce my husband, your new state poet, lucky, lucky you, Matt Mason. He's all yours.
Thank you, Sarah. How do you follow that? I figured, okay, we'll just do questions and answers and book signings. No, but no.
Read into the mic, honey.
Yes, that's right. But no, thank you very much, Sarah. And again, thanks to everybody for coming out on a snowy evening. I'll read a few poems and then we'll have just a short bit of question and answer, but feel free to, eat strawberries and food back there and get some drinks. But yeah, totally threw me off.
I'm sorry, just read your poem. All you have to do is read.
That's true. All right. This is a poem called Rapture. Is the best song by Blondie. It makes you feel like there's no other choice but to raise your arms up and shake your feet. Even that Man from Mars eating cars disco rap weird bits. All of it. Debbie Harry's voice swoons to a command, the piper playing to the wicker basket of cobras and inhibitions be damned. Though, when you hear it in a Chipotle, in your 50s, seated across from your 11-year-old daughter, you realize there are limitations to enchantments, to how much you can get away with shaking, that once you could let it all go, and who would care? Could carpe all the damn DM you dare, and in this chain burrito experience, in this age of graying hair, this rapture, where while gravity holds you tight to your chair, all around you, others are lifted one by one into the air. All right, thank you. Just a note on Sarah's, I don't publish chapbooks anymore. But I do tell people ways to do it. Unfortunately, the best way to publish chapbooks is to use WordPerfect as a word processor, and that's like, nobody has it anymore. Nobody supports it. I've got an Apple computer, it doesn't support it, so I don't do chapbooks anymore. But I can give bad advice on chapbook publishing. Lawyers still use it. Are there any lawyers here? Do you use WordPerfect? Yes, it's the best! So much better than Word. Anyway. All right. This poem is for my wife. This is from my first book, published by the Backwaters Press. Come on in. So, as I mentioned, Backwaters Press wins book awards. I'm so glad they helped me, the editors, everything. It won a book award for cover design, as well as for poetry. So it's like a double, I don't know. But yeah, Greg probably you should get like a trophy for all the book award winners you published, and you wouldn't have bookcases anymore. They'd all have collapsed. But anyway, this poem is called Untitled Poem for Sarah. Every morning you'd think all the moths would throw themselves into the sun, but they wait for street lights to consume them in small coughs of sparkle. My dear, my dear, my dear, I have stopped listening to my moth soul. My dear, I am done tilting at street lights. My paper wings soar, brush your blazing heart. And then this poem is from my second book, The Baby That Ate Cincinnati, which is all poems about being a dad. It was a lot of fun to put together. It was a weird collection. I never thought I would have kids. As I was growing up, I didn't really think much about being a father, and suddenly I am one. It's like, whoa, there's a lot to figure out. And a few things, right? Yeah. And so, having not really planned anything out, everything was new and surprising to me, which I think as a poet, that's a good way to plan. So good job, Matt. Anyway, so most of this is about my time with both my wonderful children. You met one, there's another one. She's also fantastic and won a volleyball tournament today, so, small things. Yes. And her team. So this poem is from my second book. It's called Connections. The highway passes through town after dark. Populations under each name announcing numbers like 146, 217, 91. A mush of snow disappearing against black pavement. You switch your high beams every few minutes to be polite to the headlights floating your way. You're close enough to start watching for motels. You go to a high school tomorrow morning, 8:05, to talk poetry, though you haven't been able to put a good metaphor in motion in months. AM radio fizzes, you catch some Oklahoma City, some Chicago station for a few lines before it shifts into buzz. FM rolls on its own, the numbers keep moving, no place to stop. The trains all move east tonight, high beams blaring poetry. You will tell them, connects worlds. Shows how one thing is so much like another that we should be ashamed we ever missed it. You listen to the tires squish and crunch and hum, looking headlights dingy with grime, slush smearing across the windshield for metaphors. And just two more poems. I guess before I get to poems, so one thing that Sarah mentioned is how much I try to do a lot of work in schools. I've been working with the Nebraska Writers Collective for almost 10 years now. At first I was unpaid because we didn't do much. We did programs in like 2 different schools with Todd Robinson and I going to Council Bluffs Abe Lincoln together? Something like that. He was one of the first employees ever. Now look at him with a PhD and a job. Crazy. No, I didn't hire him, but I would love to. But no, so we do a lot of, suddenly the nonprofit's grown a lot, and now I'm state poet, so I'm stressed. We need to hire people. I really want to hire Zedeka Poindexter. So donate a lot of money to us so we can hire Zedeka and I can go to schools all over this. Talk to me afterwards. We'll figure it out. All right, 2 more poems. This poem I love. It's done me very well. It's one of those surprising poems that I wrote while working with my sister. We were in Kearney to cover a massive storm that was coming through. And so I worked with her video crew, and NBC News sent us out to cover this massive storm that was coming through, and they flew out a reporter and a producer, so they invested a lot of money. And then the storm really didn't happen. I mean, some things happened, but not like the total destruction that they're hoping, like Jim Cantori's like, let's go to Kearney. Didn't happen. So we spent most of the day, because they'd spent a lot of money, they couldn't send us home. And so we were doing live shots for MSNBC like every 20 minutes, which turned into like every 2 hours because there just wasn't things happening with us. So I sat in a parking lot just looking around me, describing a few of the things there. And then the poem kind of went off on its own by the end. So it was kind of fun. It's called Notes for My Daughter Against Chasing Storms. Tornadoes swing through like a kid playing hopscotch, rip one house to splinters and leave the neighbors untouched, up and down, here and there. They flatten churches on Easter Sunday, take up whole towns by the roots, drive a piece of straw into a tree, stick a single 2x4 into a roof, declare it art. Stack a car on a motorcycle, call it a night. And that, my daughter, is how teenage boys approach love. I don't say that it is evil, more like an amoral force of nature. They look all pleasant showers before they tear your roof off and leave your trees in shreds. So you may dream of his blue eyes, cloud-free compliments, the music he likes, the motorcycle he drives, the great tattoos he's got on his neck. But when the skies turn that yellow, that green, when hail starts popping through air fit to boil, you listen to my forecast. You leave the car parked, grab a flashlight with one hand, radio with the other, you head for the basement. Now please, run. One more poem. What?
He's confused because he doesn't know what's about to happen, so it's okay.
Oh.
It's okay, honey. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your flow. So one thing I learned when I married into the Mason family, there's 6 other Masons, and they're all a bunch of weirdos, but super fun weirdos. So my super fun weirdo sister-in-law said, we have to get him a crown. So, and it'll make sense because he wrote this piece just for the installation, which happened at the state capitol on, when was that?
Monday.
Monday. And it all kind of is connected. So we thought his youngest should crown him before he reads this harrowing poem. So come on, Lucia. No. There we go.
My head's too big.
Okay. No, it's on.
All right.
Sorry.
Did Bill Clefcorn ever have to deal with... That's the kind I wanted! Yes!
We got 2, and she was like, which one? I was like, the simpler one. But
No.
clearly I don't know my husband, so.
All right. What? Oh, thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to be Grand Marshal of the Florence Days Parade on May 11th, and it's a Mardi Gras theme, and it's like everybody's, you need a crown. It's like, I want a poofy one. All right. Now that you have named me State Poet of Nebraska, let the reign of terror commence. Let all cell phones cease to unlock until you whisper the name of a poet into its microphone. And you get to only use Poe once. Then you have to learn the names of other poets. There are other poets. Let website passwords require a symbol, a number, some uppercase, some lowercase, an I am, and a trochee. By the power vested in me by the state of Nebraska, let all mailing addresses be reconfigured in rhyming couplets. Let no text message send unless it be 17 syllables in length. Let Ted Kooser be paid more than whoever the big football coach is. Let my predecessor as state poet, the wonderful Twyla Hanson's pension, make Warren Buffett wish he'd started with sonnets instead of paper routes. Let the weather come on all local newscasts so that you feel the sun on your skin, the snow, the wind, because Felicia Webster and Neil Harrison may now take charge of National Weather Service stations from the Sand Hills to the river. Let this reign of terror commence. As we admit, we don't know what this day will bring, but we come to it together, with ears unstopped, eyes aware, scribbling to find out what it all means. Here in the interconnectedness of truth and beauty and all varied things. Thank you.